we're going to do something today that we have never done in the history of the Media Institute. That's right. We're going to have a fireside chat where a former commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission will be interviewing a sitting FTC commissioner and a commissioner of the opposite party, no less. And that's why I wanted to stress the word interviewing rather than interrogating.
Oh. Yeah. My understanding how this should go.
I'm going to start by introducing our moderator, Noah Phillips, and then turn it over to Noah and let him introduce Commissioner Alvaro Bedoya. And Commissioner Bedoya, let me tell you just how glad we are to have you here with us today. We appreciate your time. Welcome. Noah asked that I give him just a very brief introduction, which is quite challenging given his many achievements, but I'll do the best I can. Many of you are familiar with him already, since he spoke to this group in November of 2018 and again in May of 2022. Noah Phillips is the co-chair of the antitrust practice at Cravath in Washington. He served as a commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission from April 2018 to October of 2022. And since joining Cravath, Noah has quickly amassed a thriving practice that has included a number of multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions. He has been recognized by numerous legal publications as one of the best in his field, including the Legal 500, the Best Lawyers in America, Benchmark Litigation, and Law Dragon. Noah received his bachelor's degree magna cum laude from Dartmouth College, where he was elected to Phi Beta Kappa, and he received his law degree from Stanford Law School. He began his career in investment banking, and after law school, he clerked on the Fifth Circuit. I'll stop here, even though I know I'm not doing him justice.
That was definitely too much justice for me. Rick, thank you so much for that very kind and undeserved introduction, and thanks to all of you at the Media Institute for having me back here. I do want to say the second time I was at the Media Institute, it was during COVID, and we did it online, and I did it in the room where we hang our kids' art. And there must have been a reporter because someone got to room rater, and this led to the singular achievement of my life. Hey. Put up the camera at a plant, that's what they said. I am humbled and really excited to be here with my very old friend, Alvaro Bedoya, Commissioner Alvaro Bedoya of the Federal Trade Commission. I first met Alvaro when we were both congressional staffers I guess it was in the Dirksen building.
That or Hart.
You worked in Hart, I worked in
Hart,
Dirksen,
yeah.
But you were presenting on
Location privacy?
On the Location Privacy Protection Act. And at that point I was like, what's privacy?
Oh yeah, no, that's not over. Yeah, go ahead.
Haven't heard of that. It was a very interesting piece of legislation that Alvaro was really leading on behalf of his boss, Senator Franken, who was a leader in the Senate on privacy. And I began to learn then what over many years subsequently I've come to appreciate, which is that Alvaro Bedoya is among the most earnest, thoughtful, and smart public servants that we have in America, and I think we need more like that. So let me do a little bit of the bio. I don't know what you graduated, this, that. I know that you went to Harvard College and Yale Law School, and my understanding is those are good places to go.
Yes, and with the loans commensurate to, yes.
I'm not saying who they didn't admit in the past, I'm just saying I understand that they are good.
They made mistakes. That's fine.
So now that that's all out. So Alvaro, just briefly on his bio, we were congressional staffers together. He then went into academia, where he was a leading voice on privacy, in particular on the disparate impact on minority groups of government practices, in particular on those groups involving privacy, involving data. And then President Biden nominated him to the Federal Trade Commission, and he joined us in, I'm gonna get that exact date wrong, but it was definitely 2022.
Yep,
May.
Yep. And this is where I jump in and I introduce my friend,
No, you
former
don't.
colleague.
You don't.
This was the plan, so if you deny it, it's on you.
I never agreed to that part.
I
We just left it standing.
insisted this not be the rote DC thing of like lob questions that a commissioner or the commissioner answers you pretend I said something interesting, and then you ask me the next question.
That's very interesting. Let's get to the question.
That's right. One of the many reasons I said yes is because my old friend Noah offered to do this. And it sounds like you know a little bit about Noah already, but I will just add that Noah is the friend and colleague everyone wants to have on the Hill, because he is kind, he is generous, he is funny, he is charming as hell. But he's also the colleague that you don't want to have because he will kill your shit. But he'll do it with a smile, and then by the end of it, you'll be like, oh, I wish I didn't like him so much. But he's brilliant, and I felt very lucky to be a commissioner at FTC for many reasons, but one of the top ones was to serve alongside you. Noah was someone who was beloved at the commission, respected, was an intellectual partner, and it was amazing if you agreed with him, and if you disagreed with him, you would learn from him because of how he would lay out his arguments and the rigor he applied to his analysis. And so I'm thrilled to be sharing the stage with you today again, and hope this can be more of a conversation than me saying interesting things that we all think are interesting. Yes.
Thank you.
No problem.
I want to start with this, so Alvaro doesn't have to say it.
Oh yeah, I'll do my own. Go ahead.
Oh, you want to do your own?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, disclaimers, speaking just for myself, not speaking for my colleagues. I'm going to speak in plain language. I recognize a lot of us are lawyers, but I'm speaking colloquially, and so if I say something that sounds a little off, please go to the case, please go to the settlement, please go to the policy statement. I am speaking like a normal human being, or trying to. And then lastly, I am not discussing anything about any of the cases currently before us in Part 3, which is our adjudicatory body, or any current investigations. So just know that when I'm speaking, I am not speaking about anything that is in that part of our institution. So that's me. What did I miss?
I'm just speaking for myself,
Good.
not my clients or Cravath, Swain, and more. But if you want, you can just take what I say as speaking for the Federal Trade Commission.
Yeah.
That's totally
That's
cool.
true.
It's not very reliable,
Right.
but
Well, no, it's very good.
So I wanna go back to where we started our friendship, which was privacy.
Yeah.
And fast forward many, many, many years to the first time that you and I did an event together, which was in Des Moines, Iowa, at the National Association of Attorneys General.
Right.
And this was your first speech, I believe, as a commissioner. And I was very thrilled that you invited me to be out there with you. The thing that you spoke about was the health of kids online.
Right.
And I know that that has been a concern of yours.
Right.
It's definitely something about which you've been vocal on the FTC in a variety of contexts.
Right.
But I thought we'd maybe start with, that's something that's of interest to you, it's
Yeah.
something that's a concern for you. But you're on the FTC, so
Right.
what are the authorities that
Sure.
you're thinking about
Yeah.
In terms of addressing the problems that you see?
Yeah, so to take a very quick step back, there's a teen mental health crisis in this country. Pretty much everyone knows that. There's a lot of research out there. It's complex, but there is a growing consensus that certain uses of social media do appear to harm certain groups of users, particularly teen girls, ages 12, 13, 14. But exactly as you said, that's something that's happening in the world. What on earth does the FTC have to do with it, potentially? There are two entry points here. One is our Kids Privacy Authority, or the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. And that covers 12 and unders, and makes sure that we don't collect data from kids or their parents without consent. We don't trick kids or pressure them into collecting more of their data than their parents want or the children want. And it also makes sure that data is not held forever, not held indefinitely. And probably the most prominent action we've taken under COPPA recently was a settlement we reached with Amazon because of the fact they were collecting kids' voices through Alexa for Kids, and then when the parents said, please delete, they would not fully delete, and then we alleged, these are all allegations, this was a settlement, that the data was being kept indefinitely in violation of COPPA. And so that was, as a parent, was something I thought was an important settlement to bring. The other authorities are FTC Act authority under Section 5, specifically our Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practices Authority. There's a legal formula set up by Congress for that. Substantial injury, not reasonably avoidable, not outweighed by the benefits. And probably the most prominent case, also a settlement that we brought, was for the makers of Fortnite. Were you there for that one?
No,
It came just after, right?
you guys came out with that case after I left.
Right after, okay. And so what was the substantial injury? You know, one of the things that we alleged in the complaint was that Fortnite, the designers of Fortnite had designed the privacy settings and set them so that adult strangers could literally orally communicate directly with children and teens that they had no relationship or contact with whatsoever. And the predictable things that you might suspect would happen happened. There was horrific cases of harassment, kids being told, go kill yourself, you know, telling their parents, someone told me they were going to commit suicide today, all sorts of horrific harassment. And so we brought an action, and there were various counts, but one of the counts was an unfairness count for the way privacy settings were set for kids and teens and the damage that did to them. And so that was an example of our unfairness authority being used. So I would say those are the two main pillars or entry points potentially.
So I think that's actually a really good segue to a conversation that you and I, in effect, have been having
Yes.
publicly over time.
Yeah.
So just, you said you weren't going to get legal. You said you were going to stay colloquial.
And then I went there. I'm sorry.
I can never
We gotta
resist
go.
legal stuff.
Yes.
So, Section 5 of the FTC Act, you need to show substantial injury for something to be unfair. Under CUPPA, you don't have the same kind of injury requirement for liability. But there has been a discussion over time about enforcement priority and about penalty and how those relate to the injury that we see in CUPPA cases. And in a recent statement, you called me out.
I did.
You wanted to push back on what you thought was the incorrect notion.
Super incorrect.
We discussed this earlier. I've never been wrong. Like a lot of people deal with that, but
I
I
like my mother. She's never been wrong either.
we agree on everything.
Yes, right.
Clean up your food. You talked about the notion that some have, that simply sharing the data of children isn't inherently harmful. With respect, what I had written was about my view that we ought to calibrate penalties differently according to different harms. So if we've got a situation where a kid is the object of predation by a person online, a stranger is coming to them and talk to them, that's really scary. And I think we all agree that was part, at least, of what animated Congress in adopting in 1998 CUPPA. Where I started to sort of make these arguments were cases that looked a little different. They were cookie cases. Like someone had dropped a cookie on a child's viewing, and they were collecting data, and as a result, the child was subject to targeted advertisement as opposed to other kinds of advertisement. So, talk to me about how you feel about the distinction that I drew.
I think it was a really valuable intervention because it helped me understand and flesh out why we have CUPPA. Because I think, and I know this is not what you think, but I think there is a caricature of CUPPA out there that it's about collecting data and ones and zeros. And are you collecting data? And what are you doing with the data? And yes, technically, of course, CUPPA is about those things. But you know, I love looking at legislative history. And when I was writing an amicus in the California Age Appropriate Design Code challenge, and so I said, let me go back and read why the heck this law existed. And if you read what Senator Bryan, the main proponent of CUPPA, said on the floor of the Senate, yes, he was worried about data. Yes, he was worried about data breaches. Pretty prescient for late 1990s, I've got to say. But the why of why he was worried about that data being collected was companies forming relationships with children that they then used to sell them things, take from them things, that took advantage of that trust that all of us know children have, where they're not instinctively attuned to be suspicious of people. And so he gave some great super late 1990s example of, you know, if a traveling salesman comes to your door and your kid answers and suddenly they're asking your kid all sorts of detailed questions, the parent would immediately be like, what on earth is happening? You need to stop this. Or if a company called a landline and suddenly started having a long conversation with your daughter, that is strange.
What's
right?
a landline?
Right, exactly. Exactly. It's like the disk and the software where like the Gen Zs are like, what is that thing? And so for me, it was very clarifying because it made clear that Congress was protecting the data because they did not want companies that parents had nothing to do with to have these relationships where they kind of knew something about the kid, they kind of knew something about the parent, and then they could say, well, actually, you should really go buy this stuff. You should really go do this, and preying upon that child's sense of trust. But I agree with you that it was a very well written set of statements.
Well, let's do this. Let's do this. As you look out into the world, and you kind of survey what kids are facing, what are the new technologies that companies or others are using online, and you're thinking about how I want to optimize my COPPA enforcement, how I want to optimize my Section 5 authority in this context. What's on your mind?
So I will say something I have a lot of questions about are AI-powered chatbots for children. I am very curious about the data these chatbots collect, the promises these chatbots make to children. What do they say to kids? So for the adults, you'll often have these chatbots that say, I love you, I care about you. And of course, they don't love you, they don't care about you, nobody is home, right? I think, I was listening, those aren't my words, this was a famous MIT psychologist who I listened to the other day. What effect does that have on a child, right? When
just to be clear, I think technically it's Scarlett Johansson who's talking to you.
No comment. It was a good movie though. But I have a lot of questions about that because for me, that could represent pretty squarely what Senator Ryan was, the 2024 version of what Senator Ryan was talking about, right? These are for-profit entities that are spinning up these chatbots, and eventually someone has to collect on that bill. And I'm curious to what end they'll be used, and I'm curious how they're affecting kids. I'll say one last thing here, which is one of the things I'm super excited about is we are slowly building out this behavioral team at the FTC. A lot of our peers abroad have psychologists, pediatricians on staff, and under Chair Khan, we've started to bring some of those folks on board. So I was having a conversation with someone, and he pointed out we were having a conversation about adolescent development, and I said to her, I still remember to this day, the day in college, I knew I had a friend. It was the day before Thanksgiving break, and I was like, wow, I have someone I can share what's bothering me with, and it was this moment that I still remember to this day. And could there be a benefit to these chatbots? Absolutely. A chatbot that reminds me, hey, you should probably do some cardio today. You should probably, do X or Y or Z today. Or, hey, do you hear about this thing on the news? Fantastic. I am worried about children, teenagers, and young people increasingly having these moments with entities created by for-profit companies rather than flesh and blood humans and learning and benefiting from that. So that's a set of things I'm worried about. And frankly, may not be a COPPA thing, right? Maybe an FTC Act thing, maybe a nothing thing. But that's what I spend a lot of time about. But I'd love to hear what you think about that stuff.
What I think about it,
Yeah,
what I think matters less.
Oh,
I think two things that I am watching out there in the world that were brewing when I was on the FTC are the social media study, the 6B study, issued letters. I think this was actually before you got on, to social media companies. And the commercial surveillance rulemaking process. There are limits to what he can say about
it's going to be a very boring
anything. But maybe here's the right way to ask the question. What should we be looking out for going forward? What should we be expecting from the FTC, enforcement related or related to those things, in this space in the coming months?
No comment.
None at all?
No, I mean, of course I care about this stuff. We haven't forgotten about it, and it's something that I care about deeply, but yeah, I can't comment.
Okay. Let me then pivot to another issue. We are here at the Media Institute, so it's like greetings everyone in FCC world. We are from the FTC. That is a different agency. However, there are some areas certainly where either the jurisdictions overlap or at the very least the interests overlap. Certainly I cannot ever get back all of the time we spent on automated calling technologies.
Oh, yes.
And all of that stuff, which remain important priorities.
Yeah, it's super important, but it's super technical.
As you think of the two agencies and where their interests may kind of overlap, again, what's on your mind?
Yeah, so this touches on a conversation that I was just having with you, with Keith, and I think Kate in the audience. Where are you, Kate? There you are. About Latinos in the media. And I promise it'll end up in an answer to your question, but Catherine Sanchez and I, Catherine is my attorney advisor on competition policy, and we had this conversation with some colleagues the other day, informal over lunch, and I asked the question, okay, who can name a protagonist in a TV show you're watching or have recently watched who's Latino, who's portrayed positively? And there were like 6 of us, and we sat there for a minute or two until our paralegal, Sophia Rice, says, Selena Gomez, Only Murders in the Building. Yes, great show, yes. But how crazy is that, right? It takes 6 people 2 minutes to answer that question, but it's a much better answer, for African American folks, right? My wife and I just finished watching all of Suits. You've got 3 or 4 amazing actors who are part of that. We're now watching Residents, and I cannot believe we're watching The Resident because it is the goriest show I've ever seen. I do not understand why my wife watches it. She does not watch it anyways. But again, the 2-star surgeons. Blah.
We're starting a podcast, by the way.
That's right. That's right.
We're going to cover all of it.
That's right. But prestige television, right? Prestige shows serving the Black community. An amazing, group. Atlanta, Empire, Insecure. Same question for Latinos. What you got, right? The best I can come up with was This Fool. It was an amazing show on Hulu. Just got canceled. And I don't even think if Chris Estrada and the producers of This Fool would call it prestige television. Last thing, pet peeve, Keith and I were talking about it, accents. We are 20% of the population, right? And we've got different levels of Spanish language ability, right? But you will watch shows, and whoever, if there's someone in the audience who's part of the company that produced Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, forgive me. Gus Fring, amazing actor, right? Supposed to be this Chilean immigrant from Chile. And you hear him speak Spanish, and it's like the man is from Mars. It makes no sense. How can that be? How can that be? And so to answer your question, my question is, what is happening in the market that this is happening? If you sliced off Latinos from the rest of the country, we would be the 5th largest economy in the world, right? 60+ million people. How on earth is there not content that serves the full diversity of this community? And one thing that I've been reading about is audience measurement. And so there is some public reporting suggesting that traditional measures of audience measurement undercount Spanish language viewership. And that if you use more data analytics, you actually capture a better slice of that. Right now, advertisers can choose. So what the public reporting says is, surprise, surprise, what are you going to do? Do you want to choose the currency that adequately values the size of that audience, or are you going to choose the currency that undervalues Spanish language viewers? And so this is something that I think I have two more years left in my term. I want to understand, is there a lack of access to capital? Are there competitive barriers? And look, some of this may not be FTC business at all. Some of this is squarely FCC land, but if we're an audience measurement, if it impairs the ability of consumer protection authorities like ours to communicate with the American public, that's something I want to know more about at the very least.
Great. Thank you for that. We've sort of been hanging out, I think, in consumer protection.
Yes.
Which is to some extent how I remember you were touted, like in your nomination process.
Yes.
Reflecting a lot of your
Try
interest
not to
on
remember, but yes.
Well,
Yes.
those are never fun. But let's move over to competition.
Yep.
Another thing that you have been talking about really from the beginning of your tenure is the nexus between labor
Yeah.
and antitrust.
Yeah.
And this is not just a you thing,
No,
not by
right.
any means. I think this is, I would argue, one of the signature features of antitrust enforcement in the Biden administration, and maybe the top, if not in the top 3 on the list for chair comp. So we are sitting here, we've got some folks who work in telecommunications.
Yeah.
We've got some folks who work in media,
Yeah.
production, so forth, distribution. I remember an incident not long ago where Sher Khan went, I forget on the podcast, it's like a Hollywood podcast where there were strikes going on in LA, within Hollywood, talking about this issue. And I'm curious, like, what has the FTC been doing? And what should we expect to see moving forward? And critically, because I'm a lawyer who has to advise companies, what should my clients be thinking about in the context of evaluating their business conduct or thinking about their mergers when it comes to labor?
Absolutely. Let me answer that last part first, and then.
And that's a compound question, so you can always object.
But,
okay, so first for the clients, because
first for the client. Look, for everybody, what Chair Khan, what my colleagues have made clear, and I want to give some bipartisan credit because it wasn't just the D's today, now. I'll get to that in a second. Is that labor markets are like any other market, and if there's a merger, if there's an acquisition that is going to substantially, hurt competition as a result, that is an antitrust problem, and that's something that law enforcers at the FTC are very interested in. And so that's clear in our new merger guidelines that were issued. And in the merger guidelines, we try to give some guidance on what folks in your shoes should be thinking about or advising clients in a merger or acquisition. But so yeah, labor matters. Labor is like any other market, and we care about competition in those markets, and we want to protect competition in all those markets. So to take a step back, what the heck is all this about? I thought antitrust about products, etc. If you go back and read the record as to what literal Senator John Sherman talked about when he went to the floor in 1890, the really interesting thing is that, yes, he talks about consumer prices a little bit. Yes, he talks about small business and the impact of small business on trusts a lot. But he also talks about labor. He also, denounces the trust by saying, they command the price of labor without fear of strikes, for in their field they allow no competitors. And so I am keen, together with Catherine, together with Max Miller, my other competition advisor, and together with our colleagues, I think it's safe to say, are keen to make sure that that original purpose of our antitrust laws is fulfilled. So what does that mean? Scrutiny and merger review. It means conduct investigations looking at labor. It means meeting with unions, understanding what their concerns are with a merger, understanding that unions are combinations of labor in the same way that companies are combinations of capital. And so I think those are big picture things that we care about. I'll give one kind of spicy example to keep things interesting for this audience, but go ahead.
No, go on.
It's too tantalizing.
I'm not going to deprive them of the spice.
Okay, so
we just had chicken.
So something that is very interesting to me, and I wrote an op-ed about this in the LA Times on Labor Day, and so there's no surprise in hearing about it from me now. But I am really interested in what's happening on the lots with extras and background actors. One thing that I've heard from a number of folks is, and these are entry-level jobs, right? We were talking about Sylvester Stallone. Sylvester Stallone started out as a background actor. He was an extra before he was a Sylvester Stallone. So it is an entry-level job that is a gateway to greater things. And what the extras were talking about during the strikes was they'd show up at the lot, they get paid X amount, and someone would tap them on the shoulder, for the whole thing. Someone would tap them and say, hey, go to tent, so-and-so over there, go to that room. And they'd be like, okay, well, why? They'd just go. They show up and they enter this room, and they would be photographed from 360 degrees. Some of them would be pulled into another room, and they would be told, smile, frown, cry, laugh. And then when they asked, hey, am I getting any extra pay for this? They'd say no. Hey, what's this going to be used for? And they'd say, well, maybe in post-production, if we need to add you in, and it's post-production, we'll just add you in, right? And I think that is interesting when a powerful market actor potentially can replicate, one of the key, and I do not like calling labor an input, but it is an input, right? What does it mean when a market actor can replicate an input into their work and do so for free, right? And do so and do it like that. What does competition law have to say about that? That's a question I And the reason I think it's interesting, not just for the folks in this room who work in entertainment, media, is because my guess is that it won't just be extras on lots in Hollywood. My suspicion is that you will have call center workers who are particularly productive, have something similar happen to them. People who provide online therapy. I can tell you a story about my brother who's a physician, but I'll spare you. And so I think that what's happening in Hollywood with this, it could mark a future trend, and that affects entry-level workers who don't make an awful lot of money. And I wonder what privacy law does or should say, and competition law does or should say about it. Long answer, sorry.
Sure. So a couple of points.
Yeah.
Maybe questions. So I see kind of a privacy thing, right?
Right.
Especially if you don't give consent and someone's taking your likeness and
Right.
appropriating it.
Right.
And I think maybe we also have some kind of IP issue
Right.
going on
Absolutely.
here.
Absolutely.
Although, I don't know if he was your former professor, or maybe even have been your former dean.
No.
Guido Calabrese used to give this lecture.
Professor,
Do we
yes.
own our own bodies? I saw that lecture
No.
both in college and in law school.
Is it? I mean, presumably it's good because
It was very thought-provoking.
you're about to dismantle it. But go ahead.
No, I'm not going to quibble with Judge Calabrese here. What I am going to quibble with is the following concept.
Yeah.
Well, let me make 2 points. One is, my understanding is it used to be true many years ago in Hollywood that they would occasionally paint wood to look like people
Yeah.
to substitute as extras because it was cheaper.
Yeah.
And I remember this was a big thing with Gladiator, right? The Russell
Yeah.
Crowe movie.
Yeah.
That they had used CGI or whatever it
Right.
was instead of people. Those are ways of getting something that looks roughly like whatever we
Right.
want.
Right.
People in the back of the screen while the action's going on in the
Right.
front for less
Right.
and not using a worker.
Right.
On some level, that's innovation.
Yeah.
Why is that a competition problem?
So, I think it depends on the circumstance, right? And absolutely they did that. They didn't, like at Star Wars, a lot of those sets are little tiny figurines that are painted.
You're not going to tell me the aliens aren't real.
That's another question for another day. Yes. Look, if you have a scenario where a powerful market actor is coercing individuals into basically surrendering not just their name, image, or likeness, but their livelihood in a way that can be stored effectively, instantaneously, reproduced at pennies on the dollar, if that, I think there could be circumstances where unfair methods authority could apply. This was one of the very interesting things about the FTC Act, one of our core authorities, is that Congress nowadays tends to pass laws banning things, being kind of specific about the things that are banned. They say, can't do X and Y and Z, particularly if A and B and C. And the interesting thing about the history of our statute is that Congress looked at that. They actually, I forget whether it was in a hearing or on the floor in the House, there was a bill that actually enumerated what were going to be unfair methods of competition. Congress almost went that route and then changed and just said, no, we want to allow for innovation in the field of unfair methods of competition. We have no idea what's going to come down the pike. And when I hear about, the extra who is a working class, man or woman, doesn't make that much money, potentially getting their livelihood captured, on tape without, being pressured into it, without understanding it, that sounds more than innovative. So am I saying that there's not benefits? Absolutely not. Automation is automation. Automation brings the price down on things, but I think that when it comes to labor, we need to ask harder questions about it.
Let me also ask a little bit about the sort of history that you laid out. I'm going to give you I don't know if it's an inconsistent,
Made a
but
mistake. I mean, the site, and no one knows the site.
a different account of the history.
Yes, absolutely.
So, John Sherman says whatever he says.
Yes.
And in 1890,
Right.
they passed a law,
Right.
it's signed by the president, and now we have the Sherman Antitrust Act, and as
Yeah.
you know, it allows the Justice Department to bring cases,
Yeah.
because we don't have the FTC
Right,
yet.
right,
And it allows private actors to bring cases.
right.
One of the early, very common cartels at which the law was aimed, in particular by private actors, is, I think, what we now think of as unions.
Yes,
Right? They were
absolutely.
groups of
Yes.
workers who were getting together and
Right.
saying, we're not going to work for that price. Right? If you want any of us,
Right,
you got to pay the same price to all of us. And if companies do that,
right.
generally, we don't know. this was a thing.
Right.
And it was such a thing that right around the same time,
Right.
in fact, just after, months
Right.
after, Congress passed the FTC Act that passed the Clayton Act,
Right.
which was a series of specific prescriptions
Right.
and included
Right.
language specifically to say, no.
Right.
Right? If you're operating in the context of organizing labor, like, we're not gonna consider that
Right.
a cartel,
Right.
even though on some level, right, it's operating like a cartel.
Yeah.
How is that consistent with the notion that originally the point of antitrust law was really to support organized labor? I agree with you completely that it has now and always did protect against labor monopsony issues,
Right.
right? But protecting, so we don't want like the companies to get together and set the wage collectively.
Right.
But organized labor seems to me to be a different thing. Am I thinking about that wrong?
I would offer the following. I need to tread a little carefully here for a number of reasons. But if you look at the record, you see two conversations on the floor of the Senate in 1890. You see a group of folks who doesn't want to hurt labor in any way whatsoever. And actually, I think that Sherman being used to shut down longshoremen in New Orleans and all these horrible breaking of strikes with violence is one of the most perverse terms that I've seen in American law. You know, because if you read Senator Edmunds, Senator Hoare, you know, all the kind of pillars of the antitrust law, they were keen on that not happening. So they wanted it to not hurt labor. But then you also have Sherman, the namesake, and I'll do you one better. Sherman didn't even write the law, right? It's either between Edmunds and Hoare that actually penned it when it went to judiciary. But when you have the namesake saying we have to ensure labor market competition, right? Not in so many words, but he actually said commands the price of labor without fear of strikes. I think the idea that part of our job is to protect competition in labor markets, whether or not they involve organized labor or unorganized labor, that strikes me as pretty straightforward. Yeah, and then I'll say one last thing on legislative history. Well, that's too nerdy, so I'll stop there. Yeah.
Nothing is too nerdy for this
I
conversation.
just feel bad because I think that we're really liking this, but I want to make sure this is still of interest.
Well, I don't know.
In the room.
What I think we can do to give them what they
Yes.
want,
Okay. Great.
other than the song and dance that we discussed
Yes.
earlier, which we're not going to do,
Yes.
because you really don't want that. Why don't we open up
Let's do
to
it.
a little bit of Q&A if folks have questions.
Hi, David
Hey,
Grossman
Dave. How are
with
you?
Consumer Technology Association. Thank you for being here. I think that one issue that unites every single company and person in the room is the issue of fraud.
Sure, yeah.
Whether you're a consumer, business, impacts your reputation, impacts your bottom line. The Commission recently adopted final rules on impersonation fraud. At the same time, though, the FTC's own data shows that cases of fraud are on the rise and that consumers and businesses are losing upwards of $10 billion a year.
Yeah.
How would you measure success as a commissioner and as an agency in terms of combating this problem?
That's a great question. Here is what I am excited about, and I think a lot about capacity building. There's a number of, and I want to make sure our investigations are strategic. So I'll just point to two things that I'm very proud of. One is, and you remember the speech on Iowa, this is something, like you said, every company in the room, I think it's also bipartisan. Tim Uris actually started, when he was chair, is making sure we're communicating with Spanish language speakers. One thing Chair Khan has done is move from a world where we speak 1.5, maybe 2 languages, right, on intake and complaints. And now you can file a complaint with the FTC in 13 languages. And the reason that matters is that is the magic number to reach 99% of the American population. So 99% of Americans can communicate to us and report fraud in the language they are most comfortable in. And you probably know this as well as I, oftentimes it is those language minorities that are targeted because the fraudsters know they have no idea what to do. So that's something I'm proud of. The other thing I'm proud of is something I'm sure you saw develop, Noah, when you were commissioner, is trying to get at not the fly-by-night operators, but some of the intermediaries that are in a position to know what's happening, a position to intervene, but too often are not doing enough to step in, despite having clear knowledge in certain circumstances that their facilities were being used to promote and facilitate fraud. And so those are two moves to expand our capacity that I think are really important. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is if you stack up FTC and FTC funding next to those of our peer institutions abroad, in Europe, say, we are a real bargain, you know, and could our folks use more resources to better combat these frauds? Absolutely. You will find no disagreement with me on that. But I share your concern. One of the things people don't talk about these jobs is the thing. When I remember seeing Noah on my first day in office, he's like, "Oh, I think I got to tell you about people are going to impersonate you." And so now, like once or twice a month, I get someone who calls me and says, "Hey, you know, just can you give me a call back? I tried the number you gave me, and it's broken." And these are folks who have been defrauded, attempted to be defrauded. So this is something I personally care about. I spend a lot of time on the phone with these folks, trying to help them. So, you know, it's a top concern and something we're working at every day.
So I regret to add, it continues after.
Are you serious?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
I get
it's
calls
horrible.
once a week.
Oh Lord.
It's really
Okay.
bad. It's unfortunate.
Yes.
Other questions for Commissioner Bedoya?
Maureen O'Connell from Charter Communications. I think there was a mention earlier about different agencies
Yeah.
and shared jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And so how do you, I'm not going to say any specifics, but how do you work with other agencies where there are conflicting rulemakings going on?
So, you know, we are in communication with other agencies on a daily basis. Now, I only see a part of it, right? Because I'm not a line staffer. I'm not in senior leadership in the bureaus, right? But a lot of that conversation happens there. But certainly at the commissioner level, you know, Commissioner Ana Gomez, I think, who's going to be speaking, Rick, you mentioned headlining your next event. She's a good friend, and we talk about things. And so there's both informal and formal processes for agencies to stay in touch. But certainly if you think there's a conflicting rulemaking, that is something that a commissioner would like to know about. So let us know.
You may be hearing from me.
There you go.
Sorry, one more, looks like.
Rachel with Wilkinson Barker. So one thing that's really wonderful about the FCC is that we have a robust ex parte practice that allows for extensive back and forth and really a feedback loop so that rulemakings can be refined sort of as they go along. So typically a reply comment process and then what's called permit but disclose. Is that something that the FTC, as there are more open meetings and more rulemakings, would be open to exploring more formally?
Yeah, so look, I can only speak to myself, and I want to recognize that ex parte may mean one thing for us and another thing for FCC, but certainly I think recently, this is all public, I took 2 ex parte meetings as part of rulemaking, and all you need to do is write it up and file it publicly, and I benefited from the information I learned in those meetings. But that's certainly something, generally my rule of thumb is if someone requests a meeting with me for something that's within our jurisdiction and they're telling me they're going to be harmed, I like to take those meetings unless if there's some serious scheduling issue or some other important reason I cannot take that meeting. You know, I see petitioning the government for addressing grievances as a pretty big part of my job, and so and this is also true for individual potential individual defendants, by the way. One thing that I've had as a policy since coming in is anytime staff wants to name an individual defendant, I, as a rule, unless there's what's the word for it when it's like imminent, when evidence is being destroyed, then there's a whole other process to get a TRO and whatnot. But my general rule is, you know, we'll reach out to individual defendants, offer them the opportunity to meet with me, and have that conversation. So, you know, I feel strongly that a huge part of my job is listening, and so as for me, you know, I've taken these meetings in the past. Sometimes there's an issue with the request coming in very late in the process, and that makes it difficult. But when they come in a reasonable timetable, it's something I'm willing to do. Or I or my team.
Well, Commissioner Bedoya,
Thank you,
Commissioner
Rick.
Phillips, thank you so much for a presentation that's not only interesting, but lively and engaging. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.